They average that out, and then they calculate about 60% of the gross, and that is what you come up with for what we call total disability compensation. That's a person who cannot do not only his regular job, but any form of work. If he's disabled, he or she is disabled from performing his regular job, but can do selected forms of light duty, the percentage might drop to 75% of that rate, okay? It's complicated. This is why we advocate many times that you should have an attorney represent you.
That's what I was going to ask. Now, obviously, the amount of information that you're disseminating right here in a very condensed form, there's much more. So if someone does not have a lawyer, will they be advised of all of these details, or do they really need to be with someone such as yourselves or someone who really knows what the system is about in order to find out these particulars, which obviously make a critical difference?
Yeah, oftentimes it depends on who their employer is or who the insurance adjuster is that's assigned to the claim. Oftentimes you might get an out-of-state insurance company who might handle Rhode Island claims in 15 other states, and they're not always as up to speed on the benefit system as they could be. So our experience is, even with some very good adjusters, people will get a fair amount of information, but oftentimes they'll only be given what they absolutely need to know, and they come into our office sometimes months later after a claim's already started, and it's amazing how little they know about this system. I like to tell clients, it's like your regular life is a game board, and you play that game every day. You get up and go to work, and you kind of know the rules of that game. When you get hurt on the job and you're out of work, it's sort of like you're suddenly placed on another game board, and it looks totally foreign to you. You don't know the rules, so how can you play the game? By coming to an attorney that's experienced in the area, we can now help them understand the rules of the game, and get them hopefully back to their original game, get them back to work where they want to be and not be any the worse for wear for it.
And yet I guess it's important to point out when you use this gaming analogy that it's meant for people who are legitimately injured rather than those who want to just quote-unquote game the system.
Correct.
Or play that system.
Correct.
Just to add to that too, Massachusetts and Rhode Island, both systems have done a lot to try to educate injured employees. There's lots of literature through the Department of Labor, respectively, in both states. But let's face it, a lot of people don't have the time to sit down, read the literature, even though it's been condensed into kind of a readable format that's not just a legalese, so to speak. It's still very cumbersome for a lot of people to read this. Sometimes you're dealing with people with very limited educational backgrounds. Yeah. Many of them cannot read or write. Even though you may have an adjuster who tries to do his or her best to try to treat the claim or the claimant fairly, sometimes certain benefits, for instance, specific compensation, disfigurement benefits, loss of use benefits, many times clients will come in and say, well, I didn't know about that. No one advised me about that. So I think it's almost an imperative that you should at some point, even if you don't necessarily retain the lawyer, but at least you should consult with one, so at least the person has an idea of what their benefits and rights are under each respective system.
Good information. And I guess while we're starting to talk about, or while we are talking about disability here, perhaps this is a good time to cross over and at least broach the subject about the Social Security that is also disability. Mm-hmm. There is an SSI, there is an SSDI disability. That too is a morass. That too is a very complex system, and I'm sure we're not going to get through that through this today. But if you could help that crossover, how does someone become evaluated and declared disabled? Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because many people that come to us for the workers' compensation case, especially those that are injured fairly seriously, Social Security disability does come into play. And they can work together. Workers' comp and Social Security disability are not necessarily, they're not mutually exclusive. Social Security disability, I guess, Len, I'll touch on first, SSDI. Sure. Is a disability system that says if you are considered totally disabled under the Social Security rules, that is, you cannot work at all. They use the phrase unable to engage in any substantial gainful activity. You can qualify for Social Security disability benefits. I've had several people in my office this week, people in their late 50s, early 60s, with significant injuries, and they're battling to sort of hang on to their jobs and stay at work, even though it's a chore for them. And when I tell them, have you ever heard about Social Security disability? Well, they think, oh, you mean retirement? Sure, when I get to 62 or 63 or 65 or 6, I'm planning on taking that retirement. I'm counting on it. I said, well, no, you don't understand. There's a disability benefit that can start much sooner than that if you're eligible for it. but you have to be totally disabled under the Social Security rules. There's a 6-month waiting period before you can collect benefits. But then you could collect those benefits for life, and they're paid for most people at the rate that their full retirement benefit would be paid at. So for most of us today, I think age 66 or 66 and a half, you'd have to wait that long to get that full benefit. Disability would pay you that benefit now. And it also comes with the added bonus of being Medicare eligible. Within 2 years of the day that you become eligible for Social Security disability, you also become Medicare eligible. So most people would have to wait till 65. Right now is the age when Medicare kicks in. If you're 58 and have a total knee replacement and don't do a physical job and can't do that anymore, you now know you'll have Medicare at age 60 or 61 and not have to wait until 65, which is a huge deal today with as expensive as health insurance is. So that's disability. You have to work also, and one other thing, and SSI is very different, you have to have worked and paid into the Social Security system for 40 quarters or 10 years to be eligible for disability. And I always say to people, you could be Bill Gates or you could be Joe the plumber. It doesn't really matter. As long as you've been paying into the system and working steadily, if you become totally disabled, Social Security will pay you disability benefits. Now, SSI is a different animal, and Lenny can address that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty funny because my experience is the same. I mean, I have people that come into my office and they say, well, what about SSI, or what about disability? And they almost use those terms interchangeably, and they're really two separate programs. I mean, the Social Security Act is made up of many, many programs. I mean, Bob talked about the retirement and some of the disability. SSI is the Title 16 portion of that, and SSI stands for Social Security Supplementary Income. That's what those initials stand for. And it is a very different program from disability. It's designed to compensate people who become disabled from all substantial gainful employment, like disability. However, people that apply for SSI do not have usually the 10 years worth of work or the 40 quarters.
Good distinction.
Right,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. So what happens in that situation? Well, SSI will pay a person if they're deemed medically eligible as disabled from all substantial gainful employment. But there's a financial element to it. There's a financial analysis where they calculate your resources on a monthly basis. For an individual living by him or herself cannot have more than $2,000 in available monthly resources coming in. Otherwise, they will be disqualified, no matter what their disability or impairment, from collecting SSI. For a married couple, it's $3,000 a month. And they look at, a lot of people say, well, do they calculate my cost of living, my rental expenses, my various expenses that they might have of living just in an apartment or whatever the case may be, rent, anything like that? No. They look at the gross income that comes in, not even your net income. They look at your gross income that comes in, and that person can be deemed ineligible from receiving any assistance if they don't meet the financial parameters, despite whatever their medical condition may be. So that's a significant difference. One other thing, whereas the disability is driven by contributions that you've made over the last 10 years or 40 quarters based on the amount of time and work that you put in, SSI is not based on that. So it's pretty much limited to the individual, and there's a cap. Usually an SSI recipient, right now they increase it a little bit every year for cost of living, but right now the cap on an SSI recipient is roughly almost, I think it's just over $700 a month now. So when you think about it, if you don't have your 40 quarters of contributions and you become disabled permanently, and that's the other thing too, Social Security will look to be medically determined eligible for SSI or disability. The disability has to last or be expected to last 1 year in duration or longer. So if you have if you have something like that that's going to disable you, that means you have a pretty permanent problem. And if you're limited to $700 a month in SSI, it's poverty level, really. It's a good program because it does provide people with some income, but it is limited in a lot of respects.